the fighting! 'Tis glorious indeed! I can see now why so many of you were raving about it in the comment section for my review of episode 1. But then I also have to say that some of you totally oversold the long take at the end of episode 2. I mean, it's good, but you got my expectations very, very high. And we'll talk about where that long take works in just a moment, but I have to say, there are better long takes out there. For instance, the long take in True Detective Season 1. The long take in Kingsman: The Secret Service with Harry in the church. Birdman, the entire movie. And even Madonna did an impressive, mini long take for her musical performance on Jimmy Fallon on Thursday night. And if you haven't seen that, you should totally watch it. But this one had its moments, and I think that what made it unique actually also hurt it. And that's that Matt Murdock went into the fight with his energy down because he was so gravely injured. And that totally made sense. It fit with the story. And I think it showed a lot about Matt Murdock personally as a character. The fight was more character development, I think, than, impressive fighting. And also, I think the stakes weren't particularly high because I don't think there's any of us watching who are like, oh, he's totally not going to make it to the end of the hallway and rescue that little boy. We all knew it was going to happen. And so because he was so low energy, I think it took the edge out of the sequence. However, though, because he was low energy, he was moving a little slower, and I think that, again, allowed us to feel more of a connection to Matt Murdock and get to know him better a little bit personally. And I would almost call it, instead of a fight sequence, I would call it like a fight acting sequence. Like he was acting through his fighting, and you don't often see that, so kudos in that regard. I also like the way he really used the walls. And again, because he was slow, because he was injured, you really got to see that. Even the way he would push himself back up off the wall to use it for momentum to keep himself from going down. That was excellent. And also, you're constantly reminded of this thing they've hammered into you, that he's taken his father's ability, inherited it, to take a beating. And they're doing a very good job of ingraining that in you, that's ingrained in Matt Murdock. The other thing that was very interesting about this fight sequence, though, is that the show wasn't afraid to have all the Russians be significantly taller than Matt Murdock. I was like, forget tiny dancer, we have ourselves a tiny fighter. And speaking of tiny fighters, the assassin in episode 3, John Healy, was also pretty small. So I thought that was some interesting casting choices indeed. By the way, there is a life lesson for you in the bowling alley in episode 3. If someone seems incredibly stupid, they probably aren't. Now back to the fighting. Speaking of also John Healy, the assassin, they have that big fight at the end of, or towards the end of episode 3. And I was watching it, and I was like, oh, this is really well done. I love when he sees Daredevil's reflection in the back of his car, the rear window of his car when he's putting something in the trunk, though he sees Matt Murdock flying towards him. I was like, that's really cool. But then I actually got a little distracted because I was like, I see the similarities to The Raid that other people are pointing out. And then I was like, man, why isn't Gareth Evans directing Daredevil? I think that if you've seen The Raid 2 in particular, The Raid Redemption, you'll see that there are a lot of similarities, striking similarities in the color palette, the tone, the fighting. But then I think the cinematography choices aren't as strong as what Gareth Evans did with The Raid 2. So it's just, I'm sure Gareth Evans must be frustrated as well. And if Marvel doesn't hire Gareth Evans to direct one of these Defenders shows, then they're asleep at the wheel in that regard, at least when finding talent behind the camera. Because he is just such a perfect match with this. And I don't understand why Gareth Evans, and we're not talking about Gareth Edwards from Godzilla, they're both named Gareth, and maybe that's hurt Gareth Evans. He's like, I'm the other one. I don't understand why he hasn't gotten any work in Hollywood. We recently talked about how Mark Miller wanted him to direct a Hit Girl movie, but then when Kick-Ass 2 didn't make enough money, that fell apart. But why isn't anybody else called Gareth Evans up? I just think it's ridiculous that his phone is ringing off the hook. And of course his talent is headed over to Star Wars, but J.J. Abrams don't need Gareth Evans because J.J. Abrams is a director. So he had to stay out of that, which is a shame, and I think he would have been a perfect match with this. Now, to be fair, we had a little bit of a disagreement, some of us, with the cinematography. I still don't think it's great. I think it's improving exponentially with each episode, as many of you said it would. But I still think it's a little bleak, it's a little drab. I don't think it's as strong as it should be. I think there are strong moments where you're like, oh, that's a good shot, that's a good idea. But, so there shouldn't be a learning curve on a professional show like this. They should have got somebody who actually had already learned these lessons and wasn't kind of learning on the job, which is a little bit what it feels like. I said it was like a student film. Well, each episode that student's returning to class and you're like, oh, you're getting better. Oh, you fixed that problem. That's great. But, I think that shouldn't be, I guess I feel with a better DP, a better cinematographer, and a better director, this could be like something even more incredible than it already is. But it's incredible already, which just shows how good it is. But it's not without flaws. We're going to discuss this. There's so much to discuss. So we're going to talk about the 2 episodes in general, and then we'll go into character breakdowns where there will be annotations. All right, so the other thing that I really like about this show is that there are 2 things. One is that it's showing also like you can break somebody down legally. You know, there's a big focus on crime, you know, the underbelly of crime, civilian crime, the stuff that wouldn't be on the Avengers' radar, right? But they're also showing how the system and bad men can get you in a totally, truly legal manner. For instance, Karen Page. I love that sequence in episode 3 with that big city lawyer. You know, their office is so much different than that of Nelson and Murdock. And I thought that was very effective. And that lawyer was very good, very slick. I mean, he really had Karen Page in a corner. So I thought that was excellent. And then also, I think a lot was done to show that with Ben Urich. I was really impressed with Ben Urich. We'll talk about Vondie Curtis-Hall. I didn't write his name down exactly, but I love him so much. We'll talk about him shortly, but I think his character, they did a great job to show with him in 2 regards. One, that he was, the healthcare system was really breaking him down. I thought that was excellent. And then also journalism, how journalism is changing. And I thought that everything that editor said, you know, you're supposed to dislike that big city lawyer, and you're supposed to really dislike the editor of the New York Bulletin, and we'll talk about that as well. But I think that both those men were right, and that was the reality of the situation that Karen Page and Ben Urich found themselves in. And I think that, you know, they were really being pressed against the wall in a totally above-board manner. And I really liked that the show was going there as well, that it was going into more sophisticated problems with the world and, you know, how you can be squeezed from all sides. So I like that a lot. And the other thing I liked is how they're making Hell's Kitchen a character. I think that Hell's Kitchen is being very well realized in terms of a sense of community. I think from the sequence in the bar where Foggy is pointing out all the different characters to Karen and, you know, telling her they might look like bad men, and some of them might be in some regard, but, you know, they're people, and, you know, don't just judge a book by its cover. And even if it might be somewhat true, it probably has a lot more depth than you might imagine. So I liked that aspect of that. And then also the priest. I thought that little scene worked. I liked that scene better than the confessional. I mean, the confessional in episode 1 got a great monologue from Matt Murdock, but I liked the way that the priest was talking to him out front, inviting him in for some coffee, and that Matt Murdock didn't go in right away. You know, he didn't go in this time. But we all know he's going to go in eventually. So I thought those were really positive steps forward taken for the show, and just shows a level of sophistication that sometimes isn't always evident in the directing, the cinematography, and some of the acting. Also, a few truly comic booky in a bad way moments, which we'll also discuss. But now we're gonna go character by character, and again, as I said, there are annotations in the video description, you know, chapter times, so you can skip to any character that you just can't wait to talk about. All right, so Matt Murdock. You know, Charlie Cox continues to be the foundation of this show. I don't know what the show would be without him. I think he's incredibly well cast, and I'm hoping this will help his career overall. This is a guy who struggled for quite some time. You know, he was in Stardust. Speaking of Mark Millar and Matthew Vaughn, that had nothing to do with Mark Millar, but Matthew Vaughn, that was one of his first big movies, Stardust. Charlie Cox starred opposite Claire Danes, and that film did not do well. So he's really been just like floating about for years. And he was on Boardwalk Empire, very good there as well, but, you know, not a main player. It wasn't his show, and he didn't stay for, you know, I think he stayed for only maybe 2 or 3 seasons. So very, very well cast here, a real find for Marvel. Now, as these 2 and 3 episodes 2 and 3 continue, I think that his powers, they are doing a better job explaining them. I think we're still not totally there, but I think that there was a lot, you know, it was very subtly done the way he and Claire talked about his ability to find out where that man was in the building. I thought that was excellent. And it was good because it put the audience in Claire's position and it made her a little bit more of a likable character. And we'll talk about her momentarily. But I thought that was good. The subtlety there was very good, and I think it took the necessary steps forward to keep us at least engaged, even if it didn't give us the total answer. But then also what I liked even more, these are my notes here if you're wondering what I'm looking at, what I liked even more was that they started to, you know, they've already ingrained in us, as I said, his ability to take a beating, right? But now they're starting to, you know, very carefully sow the seeds of why he's called the man without fear. And you saw a lot of that mantra of his, especially in episode 2, where he's saying, you know, don't give in to the fear. If you give in to the fear, they win. And I thought that was excellent. I thought that was very, very good. So I think that, taking the legacy of Daredevil and putting it in here in a little bit more of a underhanded manner is working. It's working. Then also, though, one thing that I think is a bit of a problem is that he doesn't seem particularly blind to me, even when he's in his Matt Murdock persona. As in fact, I would say he seems more blind when he's a vigilante than when he does during the day when he's supposed to obviously be blind. I mean, he always seems to be looking directly at whoever he's talking to, right? And then also, even when he was in that hallway fight sequence, not only did he know exactly where the lock to the door was, where the little boy was being held, but he opened it no problem. Now, I know he has radar sense, as all of us who are familiar with the character are already know, but I don't think he would have it in that detail, right? I mean, I think that he would kind of know basically where the lock was, but he didn't have to feel around for it at all, not even just a tad. And I just don't think that they're working hard enough. I don't think Matt Murdock is working hard enough within the world of the show, nor is Charlie Cox working hard enough in the show to sell this idea that he's blind. I mean, sometimes, like for instance, when he's in the interrogation room, I think it's very cool the way they have those dark sunglasses with the silver rim around them. That's a great shot. It's very visually arresting. It's one of the good shots to emerge, I think, from this show. But he seems to be looking exactly at the person that he's talking to. So I don't know why everybody's not like, are you sure he's blind? I suspect he's not actually blind. And, and being blind is supposed to be a great cover for why people wouldn't suspect that he is Daredevil, right? Now, going back to his vigilante costume, that's actually starting to grow on me. And I'm actually starting to feel a little sad he's going to lose it, as has been spoiled for us at the end of the season with his actual red Daredevil costume. I'm like, yeah, this kind of works. It really makes you disappear into the shadows because you're in black. And the cowl that he's put together and the longs, although I have to say, people say capes are bad, obviously, from The Incredibles. I'm surprised nobody's grabbed that long, cloth ponytail he's given himself. But it looks cool. So I like that. Also, back to the interrogation room, one other thing that I wanted to say was that, I don't know if anybody else has picked up on this, but Charlie Cox has developed this kind of like forceful whisper, like when he says, "We're taking the case," which is super sexy. I'm sure if anyone was on set, they'd be like, "Oh, do more of that. That was good. That was excellent." And I think those little moments like that, I think, are the gems of the show. And then finally, I want to touch a little bit on the violence here. We'll talk about it a little bit more with John Healy, but I think the violence sometimes goes a little bit too far. And I know I'm going to get a lot of heat for that. You guys are going to be like, "Oh, Grace, you're ridiculous. It's fine." But I think that there's a fine line between entertainment. We talked about this with the Sinister 2 trailer, between entertainment and then maybe being a guidebook. Like you don't want anyone to do that to you, right? I mean, that's really scary to put the idea of what Claire tells Daredevil to do during that interrogation on the rooftop with the knife in that guy's head. I mean, I was just like, too far. The bowling ball fight, also a little bit too far, I think. And I can understand the reasoning of the show, but I still feel that there's a responsibility factor there that they're not quite meeting. Like, for instance, the fire extinguisher, that was cool, that he could just through hearing understand where that guy was and get him with the fire extinguisher. That was cool. But then, what he did on the rooftop when he actually threw that guy over the side, I mean, Batman has a code, and I think that's gone a long way to making Batman someone, he doesn't blackmail anyone, Batman being someone who people really admire, and I feel that Daredevil, they want to make sure that, and he's getting very Batman-y in some regards, I'd have to say. I think that that's not a good way to differentiate him from Batman, that he has no moral code. I mean, I guess they're trying to go Rorschach with him, but, Rorschach is a very different character, and at the end, that caught up with Rorschach, right? The violence caught up with Rorschach, and while Claire might say, "I don't think you actually enjoy it," I don't know, right now it seems like he enjoys it. Alright, so that's Matt Murdock in episodes 2 and 3. Now next up, let's go to Matt Murdock Jr. and his father, Jack Murdock. They are also growing on me. I think they were better here. I think that the little boy does a better job with the more lighter scenes where he's just supposed to be, young Matt Murdock. Whenever he has to scream, "I can't see," or deal with some of the more emotional moments, that's where I think that he just falls short. And, perhaps he's just not reached that level in his training yet as an actor. I mean, that's a really difficult thing to call on a child actor to do. And that's why when we get child actors like Haley Joel Osment or Dakota Fanning, it's why they become so well known, because it's a lot to ask of a child actor. And I think this one, he's not a Haley Joel Osment or Dakota Fanning. But I think he did a nice job when he was sewing up his father's eye, for instance. Although, did it bother anybody else that he didn't really finish sewing up his father's eye? He put like 2 stitches in there. I was like, your face is going to look horrible, Jack Murdock. I mean, I guess they didn't have any medical glue, but I think they should, that would be a better thing for them because the stitches aren't working for them. But then I have to say, while I did like the backstory, and I think that really worked very well in fleshing out the character of Matt Murdock, I really get tired and frustrated when characters like his father make that decision that he did. When he said, and when he says, I just want people to hear my boy cheering for me one time. I was like, Jack, ask your son, take him aside, say, what would you prefer? To hear everyone screaming my name one evening, or to spend the rest of your life with me? And I would hope that he would say, spend the rest of my life with you, or else you have a very bad relationship. And if someone says, I'll take the screaming your name, well, then you shouldn't kill yourself and basically commit suicide so they can have enough money to go to law school, right? I mean, there are scholarships, and I would say that Matt Murdock would have one heck of a college essay considering everything that's happened to him, right? So I don't find that particularly sympathetic, and still, while I think the actor did a better job playing Jack Murdock, I feel that he still doesn't look like a boxer to me. I don't buy it. I mean, like, who would think he could knock anyone out, right? I mean, it's very similar to the On the Waterfront storyline, obviously. I could have been somebody, I could have been a contender. That really famous monologue by Marlon Brando, another boxer made to take falls for the criminal element. And when you compare the two, this one's left severely wanting. So I think that whenever you're doing something that somebody else has already done, and I'm sure some of you will say, well, look, can we never tell that story again? Well, of course you can. But you have to be aware of the original, the first time it was done, or the most memorable time it was done, and be aware that you have to compete with that, which this show doesn't seem to be in this regard. All right, so next, Claire. I really liked Rosario Dawson here. I usually actually don't like Rosario Dawson, and I really disliked her character in Top 5, and I was worried this was going to carry over to this. But it did not. I think she was very good, and it was really fascinating to see how much the show was elevated when you put Charlie Cox opposite an actor of the same caliber, which I think rarely happens on this show so far. So to see them go back and forth was really a joy. I also felt they really sold the scenes on her couch. I totally believed he actually couldn't take a breath. I believed that she could save him in her living room. You know, it didn't seem like one of those things that were just, cooked up, for the sake of the story. It was one of I think the most realistic, home surgery sequence I've ever seen. And I also thought the way they handled the guy going from door to door. I mean, they both did. There was so much that took place off camera that they both did a great job selling it. So I was really, really impressed with their work there together. I'll be interested to see how Claire is used going forward. I think she has excellent chemistry with Charlie Cox, much better than Deborah Ann Wool's chemistry with him. But we'll see. I think that they put her already in a difficult position. I mean, how is she going to go back to work, right? And I mean, I think they've taken her off the grid. I mean, a lot of us are thinking she's going to become the night nurse, a character used in many comics, particularly one of my favorite miniseries ever with Doctor Strange. So we'll see if that happens. That would be a very interesting development for her. She's a great female character, but I felt like they put her in a little bit of a difficult position morally, because she was like, I don't know if I'm in on this. And also, I'd hate for her to become Charlie Cox's conscience, his Jiminy Cricket. I think there are better uses for her character. I'd rather they be more peers, right? No woman wants to be, made into the nagger, right? Even if she comes from a good place, I think it's not a particularly cool thing, right? All right, so, and by the way, I hope sometime we get Elektra, right? I mean, that would be very cool as well, particularly considering the fighting on this show, huh? Okay, so Claire, very nice. Next, Foggy and Karen. I'm putting them together because I really dislike both of them, which is a shame because I loved Deborah Ann Wool on True Blood. And I don't know if Foggy's dragging her down, that actor. And, also the Foggy role is incredibly well written. So it's sad to think what a better actor would have done with it. I mean, he just has wonderful lines. The way he, turned around and, her very touching speech in the bar about how she doesn't see the city anymore. She only sees shadows. I thought they did a nice job with him trying to alleviate that tension by later joking about it, saying, I can't go home. I'm afraid of the shadows. And, to that actor's credit, he did do it in a jerky way, where it didn't seem like he was making fun of her. But I just feel that the two actors here are operating on a different and lesser level than Charlie Cox and Rosario Dawson. So it's a little frustrating every time you kind of see the show elevate with the other two, then it deflates when you bring the other two back in. And particularly when they were at Matt Murdock's door, drunkenly trying to get him to come out and play. I mean, that was just it didn't seem professional caliber. And so I was just like, oh, the scene went on for so long. I was totally in line with the neighbor next door. I was like, it's not that you're loud, it's that you're doing a bad job acting, and I can't take it anymore. Please go away. By the way, I think that I would say that Karen would have a case for sexual harassment, the way Foggy keeps coming on to her. But then I also think she's totally leading him on. You do not put your head on a guy's shoulder unless you are interested in dating him or fooling around with him at the very least, right? So I hope that she is aware of that and isn't putting him in the friend zone. And even if someone's in the friend zone, there's no head-on-shoulder action in the friend zone. Doesn't belong there. All right, next, Ben Urich. I love Ben Urich. He's so scruffy, with his beard, and you're just like, you look so awesome. I mean, he just looks like a gritty news reporter. I mean, I think his look is like perhaps the best on the show, with the glasses and the tie. But also, even though he's got the scruffiness and the glasses, his clothes are so incredibly well tailored. Like when he got out on the pier or on the dock to talk to that mob guy for his informant, he had such great swagger getting out of his car. I was like, who is this man in the tight pants? It was just very fashion forward, but without, for instance, that's something that's very popular these days. Men have particularly nice tailored slim fit. That's the style. So it makes sense that, Ben Urich just shops at J. Crew Men. So I liked that a lot. And then the character was very well realized. I think he did a really good job, very compelling, reporter. I'm excited to see how he ties into the story. Again, as I said, what his editor said to him totally made sense. I think that Union Allied, Union Allied. I think the Union Allied story is kind of boring, as I discussed with you on my review of episode 1. So I wasn't such a big fan of that part. I mean, I agree with that. So it's kind of frustrating being like, I know it sells papers. Daredevil does. Go find out about Daredevil and write about Daredevil. That will sell you paper. Also, who else thinks it's funny that he's writing for the New York Bulletin instead of the Daily Bugle, right? In the comics, Ben Urich works for the Daily Bugle, but it's like divorce, like who got what in the divorce. Sony has the Daily Bugle, so poor Ben Urich has to work for the New York Bulletin. But now that they're working together again, I guess that happened after they were shooting this. I'd be interested to see if they have the New York Bulletin bought by the Daily Bugle so that Ben Urich can work there. But very compelling, and so that was good. I'm excited for him to catch on to the Daredevil story and cover it. I'm sure Karen will tell him about the man in the mask. But then also, I liked the side story with him, his B storyline about health insurance, although this could be a way that the Kingpin gets on him, right? I mean, I'm like, what right do you have to explore these kinds of stories, considering the fact your wife is so vulnerable? Think about that, man. But then I was really glad, by the way, that it was his wife and not his daughter or his son. Well, they kept saying she, so I thought it was his daughter. And I was like, oh, please don't let it be a little kid in that hospital room. I mean, nothing against little kids, but on a show this dark and gritty, we've already got one kid with Matt Murdock Jr. We don't need more kids, right? So I was very pleased that it was his wife. So I'm interested to see how that story develops, and I thought that, Vondie Curtis-Hall did a fantastic job in the role. He was so good, really a fantastic addition to the cast. And I also want to speak very briefly about, changing the ethnicity of this role. In the comics, Ben Urich is white. And I think this is a little bit like Lawrence Fishburne becoming the new Perry White, although obviously this Ben Urich role is a lot meatier. But I think it's important to change the ethnicity here. I don't think that being white was, integral to Ben Urich as a character. And I also think that Ben Urich was never a really popular character, so he's not particularly well established with readers or viewers, right? So he's the perfect character to do this with. And then also, I think it solves a problem that the show does have a little bit, and I've also seen some of you touch on, and that's that it's really whitewashed. And I understand that Matt Murdock is dealing with a lot of Irish, and Eastern European criminal elements, but Hell's Kitchen is a very diverse place. I go near there sometimes, and it's just as diverse as the rest of New York City. So I think that to not have that represented on the show is just a little bit weird. So I'm glad that they made Ben Urich a black character, and I think that but on the same note, he's not a token character. He's just a great character that's incredibly well realized. All right, then next, the Kingsman's right-hand man. Now, his name is Wesley, but I would prefer to call him Cartier. And I loved that that's how Matt Murdock knows when he's near, that ticking of that Cartier watch. And I love it because not only would there be a unique signature to the Cartier craftsmanship, but it just really rubs it in Matt Murdock's face that this guy is just dripping with wealth. And I think that's something that we all can see now would really annoy Matt Murdock. So I think it's wonderful. And I think that this actor is also coming into his own fully, just as the character is. And he's making such a strong impression, I'd say, that it got me a little bit concerned how Wilson Fisk would possibly top this, how he would seem like he was a level above this guy. Because he's a smooth operator, Cartier. So I really liked what they did with him in this episode. And also, he's a little bit, reminding me a little bit of the man with the horn-rimmed glasses on Heroes. It's just a really cool character that you wouldn't expect to capture audience's attention, but does. For instance, when he went to the bowling alley to retrieve that gun. He did it really well. I was really impressed. He just had a lot of swagger to himself as well. Let's get him and Ben Urich in a room together. They can have a swagger off. Then the assassin. We'll talk about Wilson Fisk last. Now, the assassin's name was John Healy, but they didn't really say it that often, so to me I was just thinking of him as a generic assassin. But I thought he was a very good fighter as well. I think he did a very good job in that bowling alley sequence, which I thought was very well cut at the beginning of episode 3. You knew the gun was going to jam based on that conversation, but they plussed it by then having the guy he was trying to kill, or did kill, attack him with the bowling ball. I mean, I actually gasped out loud. I thought that was a very effective sequence, even though, again, time and time again, I think the show goes too far. It crosses the line. You're like, I'm with you. Oh, wow, you went too far. I feel a little bad watching this. And that's how that scene, I think, is a perfect example of that. Then, though, the thing that I wanted to talk about most with this character is when he killed himself. Because that was ridiculous. That was like the one time that I've watched, the only time, actually, I think, during all 3 of these episodes that I've seen so far, where I was like, that's just bad writing, right? Like, why give up the name Wilson Fisk? If you know you're going to kill yourself, literally, 2 minutes after you give the name up, why not just let Daredevil kill you, right? Like, if you're going to kill yourself anyway, why not play Russian roulette with this vigilante's morality who has you with a knife to your neck, right? I mean, let Matt Murdock do that. And take him down with you. Be like, I might be dead, but I tainted your soul. I just thought that, it was sloppy and lazy. Especially, I don't think that him killing himself is going to keep Wilson Fisk from exacting the revenge that was described, that he will go after his loved ones, etc. So if you know that's what's at stake, I don't understand why he would give up the name, especially if he's such a professional that he knows Wilson Fisk's name. I mean, throughout the episode, I think it's 2 and 3. Yeah, 2 and 3. They had, every criminal would be like, I don't know the name. Nobody tells me the name. I just get signals. And they're being so careful not to give names. And even in the first episode, Cartier was like, we never say his name. So how does this guy even know his name, right? It doesn't make any sense. So I found that very, very frustrating. And then the other thing that I wanted to talk about finally is Wilson Fisk. Now, Wilson Fisk, I thought it was a very bold move not to show him until the end of the 3rd episode. That's a long time not to show your big bad, especially since they've been building up to him so much. And I have to say, when he did show up, I was underwhelmed. Because I thought that the way they decided to do it was not a credit to Vincent D'Onofrio. It didn't do him any favors. And that, of course, I'm talking about that woman in the gallery. Now, she's a well-known actress, so of course we know she's going to stick around. They wouldn't have her come in just to do that one speech. But to introduce your big character as already being wrapped around somebody else's finger, I don't understand that at all. I'd be like, wow, he's not even in control of himself, guys. I mean, why are we following him? I mean, it's like, in every time you see stuff like this, you're like, as soon as a woman comes on the scene, she's like the Yoko Ono to the Beatles crime organization the Kingpin has put together. I don't know, everybody is horribly concerned about her. And then they have her big speech, and then they cut to Wilson Fisk, the first time we see his face. And he's so unsure of himself, and he's a mix of loneliness and sexual attraction to her. He actually, I think, looked her up and down really with a glance. And I was like, really? This is our first introduction to you? You seem so weak and dependent on this woman. I just thought it was a mistake. And I'm surprised when filming it, they weren't like, we gotta do it again. And Vincent D'Onofrio should have said, can I see how the take turned out? Because I think it got the character off to a very poor start. We'll see how it fares in episodes going forward, but I just felt it was a pretty big mistake. All right, so that's my review of episodes 2 and 3. I'd have to say that 3 is actually my favorite episode so far, and I'm very curious if you think that's because it was the best episode or because you think the show is pulling me in. All right, thank you so much for tuning into my review. I look forward to discussing the rest of the season with you, and you can look for more episodes to drop more reviews to drop throughout the upcoming week. All right, thanks for watching.